AutoCAD layers are used to group information in a drawing by its function and to enforce line types, colors, and other standards. Layers are the equivalent of the overlays used in paper-based drafting. Layers are the primary organizational tool used in your AutoCAD files. Let's open up a drawing. Let's look at the architectural example imperial file. Here we have a very simple, very basic architectural drawing with a few different layers in them. If I go to the Home tab on the ribbon and I look at the Layers panel, there are a lot of different tools in here to allow me to use, set, create, and manipulate my layers. If I click on this arrow here, I get a list of the available layers in my file at the moment. By creating layers, you can associate similar types of objects by assigning them to the same layer. For example, you can put construction lines, text dimensions, and title blocks on separate layers each. In this file, we have a layer for the walls, a layer for the windows, and a layer for the doors. You can see they're all different colors here. That's just there to help you distinguish between the line work so you can know what is what. These are the layers here. They control the line type and the color of our objects. By creating layers, you can associate similar types of objects by assigning them to the same layer, as was done in this example. With layers, you can then control the following. You can control whether objects on a layer are visible in any viewport. You can control whether and how objects are printed. You can control what color is assigned to all of the objects on a layer. You can control what default line type and line weight are assigned to all of the objects on that layer. You can also control whether objects on a layer can be modified. You can lock down your line work that way. You can also control whether objects display with different layer properties in individual layout viewports. Now, a few basic things about layers. Every drawing includes a layer named 0. If I open up the Layer Properties Manager, I click on this button right here, or I can type in LA on the command line. Now, the Layers Property Manager is a palette, so you can move it around and do things with it, just like any other palette. Every drawing in it has a layer named 0, just like this one right here. Layer 0 cannot be deleted or renamed. This layer has two purposes in a file. One, it ensures that every drawing includes at least one layer. And two, it provides a special layer that relates to controlling colors in blocks. We'll talk about that at another time. I recommend that you create several new layers with which to organize your drawing with, rather than create your entire drawing on layer 0. I've seen that. That's not good CAD practices. In this architectural example drawing, we have a few different layers in them, and we've gone over them. So here in our Layer Manager, you can get to a lot of different tools for creating and managing your layers. We'll talk about the Layer Manager in depth later on. But here is the Layer panel for your ribbon. You'll get to a lot of different controls from it here. If you click this Layer Properties button, that will open or close the Layer Manager. If you select on this bar here, you will get to the different layers in your file. If you select on one, it will become the current layer. Whatever layer is current, that's what your new objects will be drawn on. So this object was just drawn on the viewport layer. You can switch to the doors layer. And now when I draw an object, it's blue because it's on the doors layer. I have different buttons here. I can isolate my different objects and freeze some of my layers. So if I click the freeze button, I can freeze all of the doors. Now they're still in my file. They're just sort of off. I can't see them. That way I won't accidentally delete them or manipulate them, and it gets them out of the way. I can turn them back on by clicking on the Turn All Layers Back On button here. So this is off, and then this is freeze. We'll talk a little bit more about the differences between turning off a layer and freezing a layer more in depth. But you can do that to help you work with your line work while other objects are out of the way. That way you won't accidentally delete them, modify them, and it makes things easier when there's less on your screen. This little button here, the triangle, brings down some other settings that are a little bit more advanced. You can copy objects to a new layer. You can do the layer walk, which will display your objects on specific layers for you. You can freeze layers. You can merge layers so that you move all the objects from one layer to another and it gets rid of that layer for you. It helps you clean up your drawing and this will delete all the objects on a specific layer. The Layer Manager is a palette, and it is the main format for creating and maintaining your drawing's layers. It's also where you can go to manipulate them. Let's open up an example file. Let's look at the architectural example imperial drawing. Now you can get to the Layer Manager a couple of different ways. You can type in the word layer, or you can just type in LA, or you can click on the Layer Properties button right here. Now the Layer Manager is a palette, so it has all the features of a palette. It can be docked, it can be stretched, it can be moved around, it can be hidden, etc. It has scroll bars in it because it contains a lot of different information. Any changes that you make in the Layer Manager are completed in real time. That means as soon as you change the layer property or state, your drawing is instantly updated. This allows you to keep the Layer Manager open at all times if that's what you choose to do. You can also dock it from side to side if you so choose. So I'm going to make some changes here just to demonstrate to you what it looks like when you make changes. So I clicked on the wall layer, which is the layer for our walls, and it's the color red. I'm going to change the color red. You just click on the color, and then the color palette comes up. Find the layer you want it to be, select it, click OK, and all of your walls are instantly changed. It works the same way with line type and line weight and any of the other settings that you may want to use in your Layer Manager. The Layer Manager is where you'll go to create new layers, to change the names of them, or you can even turn them on, turn them back on, or you can even freeze them. You can lock a layer. If I lock a layer, it kind of gets faded. And every time I hover over an object on that layer, you see a little glyph that comes up in your crosshairs. It looks like a locked lock. Well, that means that I can't do anything to these objects because the layer is locked. So if I select them, which I can do, I can't erase them. It won't let me. Same thing here with the move command. I can't move them. So that's one way to protect your line work, is through locking your layers. It's a very useful tool. When you're done with the Layer Manager, just click on the X and you can come back to your work, and it doesn't take up any room. If you're using multiple monitors, the Layer Manager is something you might want to have open up on your second screen. That's the way I work, but not everyone. It's okay. You can work with it. You can always get to it very easily. Just type in LA, it's there, and close it. In this video, we're going to take a look at freezing, thawing, and turning on and off layers. In order to do this, let's open up an example file. Let's take a look at the architectural example imperial drawing. This file has a few different layers in them, and we'll be able to take a look at them and see what they do. Now you can make drawing layers invisible either by turning them off or by freezing them. Both of these commands will do similar things, but they do it in a little different way, and they have a little bit of different features. Sometimes that will affect you, other times it won't. Turning off or freezing layers is very useful if you need an unobstructed view when working in a detail on a particular layer or set of layers, or if you don't want to plot specific details such as reference lines. Now, whether you choose to freeze layers or turn them off depends on how you work, on the size of your drawings, and what it is exactly that you want to do. Turning off a layer, you can do that by clicking right here. Click the off button and then select an object to turn off. If that layer is current, you'll get this warning. It'll say, hey, this is the current layer. If you turn this off, everything you draw is going to be unseen. So that line work is turned off. I can't see it anymore. And since that's the current layer, and you can see right here, it has the bluish grayish light bulb, that means it's off. Whenever I draw a new object, I can't see it, but it's still there. If I click this button here, that will turn all layers back on, and you can see my new object is right over there. When you turn on or off an object, the objects are turned off, meaning that the layers are invisible, but they still hide objects when you use the hide option when you're printing or working in 3D. When you turn layers off, then the drawing is not self-regenerated. When you freeze a layer or thaw it, objects on the frozen layers are invisible, but they don't hide other objects behind them in doing like 3D work. Now, in large drawings, freezing unneeded layers speeds up operations involving your display features and regeneration. So AutoCAD can handle it better when you freeze layers as opposed to turning them off. Thawing one or more layers may cause the drawing to automatically regenerate itself, so you can keep that in mind. This used to be a big deal a long time ago on older machines when it was just very hard for the computer to keep up with what you were trying to do in AutoCAD. Today's machines, it's not so much of an issue. Freezing and thawing layers, though, does take more time on the computer side of things than turning layers on and off. Though, to be honest, I have no idea about that difference. I can't tell it. That just comes out of AutoCAD's help, and it tells us that. In a layout or in paper space, if I go to a paper space tab, click in my viewport, and I have my objects shown here. I'm going to lock my viewport so that I can zoom in and out, and I can see my different objects. Now, when I'm in a layout, I can freeze layers in an individual layout or an individual viewport. This box here, this black box, is called a viewport. It gives me a look into the model space where my model is, and it can allow me to display my drawing in a specific way. I can freeze objects in a specific layer. So if I use the freeze command, it's right here on the layers panel. If I select that, let's say I don't want to show my windows in this viewport, I can freeze that layer. My windows are gone. If I go back to model space, you'll see they're still here. They just aren't being displayed. Now, if I turn off a layer, like my doors, they won't be displayed in this viewport, but in fact, they're going to be turned off everywhere. That's the biggest difference that you will actually use in all practicality between off and freeze. When you turn a layer off, it's off everywhere in that file. When you freeze it, it can be frozen only in one viewport at a time. Now, you can freeze it in multiple viewports, but it has to be done one at a time. That way you can turn off those objects in that view, but keep them on in another view. When you lock a layer, you make sure that everything on that layer cannot be edited. I can't delete it. I can't move it. I can't copy it. Can't do anything to it. It is safe. So when you get a part of your design done or finished, lock those layers. That way it won't accidentally be changed, and it tells everyone else, hey, I'm done with this. Don't touch it. Leave it alone. Most of the time, your drawing won't have a layer in it that you need or want to use. It's just something that happens. To eliminate this issue, I recommend that you start every new drawing with a template file that has your most common layers already put into it. Regardless of how you started your file, though, you're going to need to make a new layer. I'm going to show you how. Let's open up a file, go to the Architectural Example Imperial Drawing. Now, this file already has several layers in it, and that's great. Open up your Layer Manager, type in LA on the command line, or click on the Layer Manager button in the ribbon. And once you're here, you can create new layers. Making a new layer is pretty simple, actually. Just come up to one of these buttons here. It's this one on the left. Click it, and it creates a new layer, and it starts off by calling it Layer 1. Once you have a Layer 1, it will make a Layer 2, Layer 3, etc. Now, the settings for that layer defaults to whichever layer you had selected at the time. At the time, I had the 0 layer selected, so it will copy all of the settings from that layer. Now, this is a good thing to keep in mind when you make a new layer, because you want to select the layer that has most in common with what's going to be in your new layer. That way you have to change less. So it's a time saver that way. Now, to change the settings, any of the settings, you just click on them right here in the Layer Manager. To make a layer current, just double click it. This little green check means that that layer is current. To change the layer name, you can right click and select the rename layer or press the F2 key and type in the new layer name. Now, a lot of these columns of information can be quite long or wide. If I move my mouse up here and I get this little double arrow, I can drag it over left or right, and that will help me to get a better look at what's going on. If I double click when I'm right up there, it'll expand the width of it till it matches the widest part that we have. Now remember, your Layer Manager is a palette, so you can stretch out the sides if you need to. This will give you a little bit more room. And in fact, you can even turn off some of these columns if you don't want to use them. To get to some of the other settings for these different columns, make sure you don't have a command active and then right click over the top of one of these column headings. Everything you see checked here is turned on. Now I can check this to turn them off, and now it saves some room. If you want them back on, just check them again. Every layer that you have can have a description, and I think it's a good idea to fill that out. In this case, we see a layer called viewport, and it says it's for viewports set to no plot. That's another feature that we have right here. This is the plot feature. Right now, this one has a little red circle with a slash through it. That means anything drawn on that layer, even if it's turned on or thawed, it's visible, it won't print to your paper. That's a great thing to do with the viewport layer. It's also a great feature to add to construction lines. Anything you use to help you draw with that you need in your file, but you don't want to show it in your drawing. That's what that no plot will do. It's very useful. Now you can change layer settings, multiple layers at a time. So just select the different layers you want, pick one, and then hold down the Shift key, and it will pick everything in between that. Click somewhere else to unselect all of those, or you can just press and hold the Control key and select the layers that you want to change. Now you can turn them all off, turn them all back on. You can freeze them. You can change their colors, whatever it is that you would like to do. And this is handy because it allows you to change your file in a lot of different ways very quickly. You can also create layers that are automatically frozen the first time they appear in a new drawing or layout. That's what this option is right here. Now you might want to do this if you're working on an existing drawing and you're adding a new feature to it that needs a new layer. Turn that off, and what will happen now is whenever a new layout is made, that layer will automatically be turned off. So if I close this, I go to a layout, let me erase this one. If I go to create a new viewport, I just want to make one single viewport. When I do, all of my doors are turned off. As you can see, they're not in there. I can go into this viewport, open up my layer manager, and I'll get a few more columns for viewport settings. This tells me right here that this is frozen in the viewport. If I select it, my doors will come back on, and there they are. So you can isolate objects, hide objects by viewport through those viewport-specific settings. The nice thing about being able to do that is that I can have one set of line work, one model, but I may need to display it differently on multiple drawings. Well, this allows me to do that without having to draw new layers for specific reasons. I can use the same ones that have the information on it already that I need. I can just choose to not display it by freezing them in that specific viewport. And on the same note, you can also change things like color and line type by viewport only. That way you can make a construction line, a solid line, show up in one drawing, but then make that a hidden line in another drawing without having to change your drawing objects. Perhaps one of the biggest issues when creating drawings on a computer is making sure that they turn out the way you want them to on paper. This is where good layer management and use comes in. The purpose of layers is to organize the data in your file so you can work with it and so that it has a correct visual display on paper, not just the screen. We've already kind of mentioned this before with talking about the different viewports that you can use. Let's open up the architectural example imperial drawing. Now, layers control how an object looks, but you can override a layer setting on an object by assigning that object a color or a line type, etc. Please don't ever do this. There are 3 keys to good object visual display management. They are 1, by layer, 2, by layer, and 3, by layer. Every object can either be assigned its properties individually or by layer. Let me open up the Properties panel. Press Ctrl and 1 at the same time. And if I select this line, I see that it's red. It's on the wall layer, and this object is set to by layer for its color. That means the color of this object will be displayed according to the color of the layer setting. So if I go to my layer manager and I go to the wall layer, I see it's set to red. I can change them all to yellow right here, and all of my walls are updated instantly. Now I can select the object or multiple objects, and I can override those layer settings. If I go to the color option on the properties palette, I can manually change it to red. Now, once I've done this, that means these walls will always be red no matter what. I can't change them until I go back to these objects, select them, and change them back to by layer. So if I want to change the wall coloring to magenta, I can't. I've broken my CAD file. So you have to be careful with that. Every object can either be assigned its properties individually or by layer. The three main display properties of an object they can have are color, line weight, and line type. Each layer can have these properties set. There's also transparency if you're using transparency. Now, it's good practice to keep all of your objects set to by layer. That allows you to control them in your viewports. Because now, when I go to my Layout tab, I open up this viewport, and I see that some of my walls are red, and some of them are magenta. So, well, what's the problem with that? Why is that a big deal? Well, if you're printing in color, some of your lines are going to be red, some of them are going to be purple. What if the client wants them all to be purple? We've made things difficult for you. You can't do that. You have to go back in and manually switch them to magenta or purple, whatever the color is. The problem is, let's say you go into a file that somebody else is also working on, and you switch it from by layer to red. You've just messed up your coworker's drawings because they needed it to be by layer because on their drawing, that wall needs to be faded back like a gray color. So now when I go to change this to a faded back gray color, the walls that you changed are now big and thick and black and dark when they print out. That's messing up their drawing. You lose control of your object's data when you manually override it by object. So you need to keep that in mind. Make it by layer all of the time. You say, well, I have this one line. It's only one line, and I need it to be this specific color, and I need it that way all of the time. That's fine. Make a unique layer then for that specific circumstance. And that's okay to do that. Because then, what if the circumstances change throughout the life of the project? That does happen all of the time. So just keep that in mind. It's in good practice to draw everything by layer. In this chapter, we learned how layers can be used to manage the visual display features of a drawing. In this chapter project, we're going to create a new template file with a set of layers that we will use in a future project. So make sure you do this and then you follow the instructions correctly. Now to start off, let's open up a template file. So go to your New tab. If your New tab isn't showing, you can click on this plus sign here in the File tabs. That will bring up the New tab. Go to the Get Started section here on the left, and on the Start Drawing, click Templates. Now we want to use, you'll have to scroll down, the tutorial iarc.dwt. So just scroll down until you find it, and then select it. This is a file that's already set up a little bit and has a bit of a title block on it. So that's what we want to use. Click on the Model Space tab down here, because this is where we want to be at. Now before we get started, it's good CAD practice to save your file right away. I'm going with Save As, press Enter, and I'm going to call this project template.dwg. And also, if you have any worries about making the file correctly or not, I've saved this file in with the videos so that you have it as an example. Feel free to open it up, look at it, and compare it with the way you set your drawing up. I'm clicking Save and then clicking Yes because I do want to replace the file that's there. This chapter project is actually going to go quite quickly. It'll be rather simple. So open up your Layer Properties Manager, and as you can see, there are already a ton of layers in it. We're going to create a few new ones though, and some of them we're just going to change. Here we have a dimensions layer. We're going to use that in our drawing, but I want to change a few things. I don't want the color to be red. So click on the red button for the color. We're going to make it white. Now when it comes to the color white, it's color number 7 in AutoCAD. It's white whenever you have a black background on your screen, and it will always print out as black on your printer. But when you have a white background on your screen, it'll show up as black. I know it's kind of strange, but that's the way that one works. It makes a lot of sense though, because if you had a white line type on a white background, you'd never be able to see it. Same way with a black line on a black background. We're going to click OK. Now we need to make a couple of new layers. Some layers for some walls. we don't have a wall layer that I want to use. So I'm going to create a new wall. I'm going to call it wall exterior. It's going to be continuous and white. So I wanted to find a layer that has that information on it and that maybe doesn't have anything in the description. Doesn't look like that's possible. We don't have that. So we're going to have to make sure we change it. So I'm going to start with the electrical. Select it, click on the new button, and I'm going to call it wall dash exterior. And I want it to be white, continuous. I'm going to change this. I'm going to delete the contents of it. I'm going to call it exterior wall. Now I'm going to make another one. Select the wall exterior layer, click new, call this one wall dash hatch. And the color for this layer is going to be 8, which is this right here. So you can select the color here, you can select any of the colors from up here, or you can type in the numerical value for that color. In this case, it's 8. I'm going to make another wall layer, call it wall dash interior. And it is going to be blue, or number 5. We need to make a door layer. Select new, call it door. And we want our door to be yellow. Next, we're going to make a window layer. And our window layer is going to be color 30. Select the color box, type in the number 30. It's a kind of an orangish color. Now we need to make a chair layer. Call it chair, and we want it to be magenta, which is number 6. Almost finished. Now we're going to make a text layer. Now we see here this warning that comes up. The layer text is already in the file. That's fine. I'm going to click close, hit the escape key, and I'm just going to scroll down to the text layer, and I'm going to make any changes to it that I want. So we have a text layer, it's continuous, and I want it to be white, which is number 7. Now we need to make a plant layer, and I want that color to be red. Now we need to make a layer for our building's footings. I'm going to call it footing. It's going to be a faded back line, so it's going to be color 8, and I'm going to change the line type. So I click on the line type, and I want it to be hidden. Well, hidden isn't in here. This is dashed. So when you want to change the line type on a drawing, you have to click on load. And then you find through this list the line type that you want to use, and I want to use hidden. So I scroll down my list until I find it. There's hidden. Click OK. Then I select on the line type one more time, and I click OK. And now that line type is hidden. Now I want to make sure I've saved all of this so that I don't lose it. Now we have the beginnings of a template file that has layers set up in it for our work that we're going to do in the future.